When Elena offers a tissue to a heartbroken stranger in an empty chapel, she doesn't realize he's a billionaire groom left at the altar. But what begins as a simple act of kindness quickly turns into something much deeper. If the world will let it. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Helena Porter's feet ached as she walked the busy downtown streets during her lunch break. At 36, she felt much older, worn down by the weight of her 2 jobs and caring for her sick father. The city was too loud today. Cars honking, people shouting into phones. She needed quiet, peace. The old stone chapel near the edge of downtown had always been her refuge. Elena wasn't particularly religious, but there was something about the silence inside those walls that helped her breathe again. She slipped inside, relieved to find it empty as usual. Or so she thought. Elena settled into a back pew, kicked off her worn waitressing shoes, and closed her eyes. That's when she heard it, a quiet sound like someone trying not to cry. She opened her eyes and peered down the aisle. A man sat hunched in the front row. His broad shoulders shook slightly, his hands trembling as they covered his face. He was dressed in what looked like an expensive tuxedo, though his bow tie hung loose around his neck, and the flower pinned to his jacket was crushed. Elena hesitated. She'd come here for solitude, not to comfort a stranger. But something about the man's quiet grief pulled at her. Without thinking too much about it, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a tissue. She had plenty. Keeping tissues handy was second nature when your father was fighting cancer. She stood up and walked quietly down the aisle. The man didn't notice her approach, lost in his pain. Elena cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me," she said. "I thought you might need this." The man looked up, startled. His face was handsome despite being red and puffy from crying. His eyes were a deep blue, now bloodshot, and he looked about 40. He stared at the tissue she offered as if confused by the gesture. "Thank you," he finally said, taking it with a slightly shaking hand. His voice was deep, with the polished accent of someone who had expensive schooling. Elena nodded and turned to leave, but something made her pause. The raw pain in his eyes reminded her of how she'd felt when the doctors first gave her father's diagnosis. "Would you like me to go?" she asked softly. "Or would you like some company?" The man looked at her for a long moment. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Elena shook her head. "Should I?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "Everyone else in this city seems to. Well, I've been working double shifts for months. I barely have time to watch TV or read the news," Elena replied with a small shrug. The man nodded slowly, then gestured to the pew beside him. "I wouldn't mind some company, if you have the time." Elena sat down, keeping a respectful distance. They sat in silence for several minutes. The only sounds were the occasional car passing outside and the man's breathing as it gradually steadied. "I was supposed to get married today," he said suddenly. "Oh," Elena said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he replied. "She did me a favor, really." "How so?" "She ran out the side door of the church 20 minutes before we were supposed to say our vows." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. 300 guests waiting, 5 bridesmaids, 7-tier cake. Press outside ready to photograph the wedding of the year, and she just left. "That must have been humiliating," Elena said, not sure what else to say. "The strange thing is," he continued, looking straight ahead at the small altar, "I'm not sad that she's gone. I'm sad that I wasted 5 years on someone who never really loved me." Elena nodded. "Sometimes it's not losing the person that hurts, it's losing the time." The man turned to look at her with surprise, as if she'd said something profound. "Yes," he agreed. "That's exactly it." He studied her face, then added, "I'm Grant, by the way. Grant Whitaker." "Elena Porter," she replied, offering her hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "Elena," he repeated, as if testing the name. "Would it be strange if I asked you to go get coffee with me right now?" Elena blinked in surprise. "Coffee?" "Yes. I've been sitting here for hours, and I could use a change of scenery, and talking to you, it helps, somehow." She should say no. Her lunch break was almost over, and she needed to get back to the diner. But there was something in his eyes, not just grief, but a kind of desperate loneliness that resonated with her. Only if you make me pay, she replied with a small smile. Grant actually laughed at that, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. I think I can cover it. They walked down the chapel steps side by side, he in his rumpled tuxedo, she in her faded work clothes, and found a small corner cafe where no one seemed to recognize him. Elena called her boss at the diner and asked for the rest of the day off, claiming a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. Something about this moment felt important, urgent even, like she needed to be here. Over steaming mugs of coffee, Grant told her about his failed wedding. How his fiancée Vivian had come from the same wealthy social circle. How their relationship had always been more about appearances than genuine connection. How deep down, he'd known something was missing. Your turn, he said, after finishing his story. Tell me something about you. Elena hesitated, then told him about her father's battle with cancer, how she'd moved back home to care for him, how she was working at the diner during the day and bartending at night to cover the medical bills that insurance wouldn't pay. That must be exhausting, Grant said, his eyes full of genuine concern. It is, Elena admitted, but he's my dad. When I was little, he worked 3 jobs to take care of me after my mum left. Now it's my turn. They talked for hours. Grant ordered sandwiches when they got hungry, then more coffee, then dessert. Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd spent an afternoon just talking to someone, without watching the clock or worrying about bills or medication schedules. You haven't once asked me what I do for a living, Grant noted as they finished their second round of coffee. Elena shrugged. Does it matter? Most people think so. I'm not most people. Grant smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. No, you're certainly not. As the afternoon light began to fade, Elena reluctantly checked her watch. I should get going. My dad will be wondering where I am, and I need to give him his evening medication. Grant nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. Could I see you again? Maybe tomorrow? I'm working tomorrow, Elena said. Both jobs. The day after then? Elena studied his face. Was this just a rebound for him, a distraction from his humiliation? She couldn't afford to get involved with someone who was clearly dealing with his own drama, especially not someone from a world so different from hers. But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity she hadn't seen in a long time. I have Wednesday. Afternoon off, she said finally. Grant's face lit up. Wednesday it is, same place? Actually, Elena said, thinking of her father alone in their small apartment. Would you mind if we met at my place instead? My dad has a doctor's appointment in the morning, and he gets tired afterward. I don't like to leave him alone too long. Of course, Grant said, looking surprised but pleased by the invitation. Elena scribbled her address on a napkin. Say it's not fancy, she warned. I don't care about fancy, Grant replied, carefully folding the napkin and putting it in his pocket. I've had enough of fancy to last a lifetime. They parted ways outside the cafe. Grant hailed a taxi for her, despite her protests insisting on paying the fare. Thank you, he said before she got in, for the tissue, for listening, for not asking what went wrong or telling me it was for the best. Sometimes people just need someone to sit beside them, Elena replied. That's all. No, Grant said quietly, that's not all. But thank you for pretending it is. As the taxi pulled away, Elena watched Grant standing on the sidewalk, still in his wedding tuxedo, looking both lost and found at the same time. She told herself not to read too much into today. He was vulnerable, on what should have been his wedding day. This wasn't the start of anything, but as the city lights began to come on around her, Elena couldn't help but feel that something important had happened in that quiet chapel, something neither of them had been looking for. When she got home, her father was sitting in his favorite chair, a blanket over his thinning legs. So you're late, Ellie, he said, using his nickname for her. Everything okay? Elena hung up her coat and smiled. Yes, Dad. Everything's fine. I just met someone today. Someone special? Her father asked, his tired eyes showing a spark of interest. I don't know, Elena replied honestly. But maybe, just maybe. Across town, Grant Whitaker stood in the vast empty penthouse that should have been filled with wedding gifts and congratulatory flowers. His phone had dozens of missed calls and messages from family members, business associates, society friends, all wanting to know what had happened. He ignored them all. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, thinking about a woman with kind eyes who had offered him a tissue when he was at his lowest. A woman who didn't know or care about his name, his money, or his social standing. For the first time in years, maybe even for the first time ever, Grant felt like someone had seen him. Not the Whitaker heir, not the philanthropist, not the eligible bachelor, just him, just Grant. He pulled the napkin with Elena's address from his pocket and looked at her neat handwriting. Wednesday suddenly seemed very far away. Grant pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for a local florist that wasn't overpriced or exclusive, the kind of place a regular person might buy flowers. He found one that was still open and placed an order for a simple bouquet to be delivered to Elena's address the next day. No card, no message, just flowers. Because sometimes people just need to know they aren't alone. The doorbell rang the next morning just as Elena was helping her father back into bed after breakfast. The sound was so unexpected that she jumped slightly. "Are you expecting someone?" her father asked, wincing as he settled against the pillows. "No," Eleanor replied, checking that his water glass was full. "Maybe it's a package." When she opened the front door of their modest apartment, she found a delivery man holding a simple bouquet of daisies and sunflowers. Nothing fancy or expensive, just bright, cheerful flowers that seemed to bring a bit of sunshine to the dreary hallway. "Elena Porter?" the delivery man asked. "That's me," she said, confused. "These are for you." He handed her the flowers and walked away without waiting for a tip. Elena searched for a card but found nothing. She knew immediately who they were from. Only one person in her life right now would send flowers without signing his name. She arranged them in an old mason jar, the closest thing to a vase she owned, and placed them on the kitchen table where her father could see them from his bed in the adjoining room. "Secret admirer?" her father called out. Elena smiled. "Not so secret. Remember the man I told you I met yesterday? These are from him." "Must have made quite an impression," her father remarked. Elena nodded, touching one of the daisy petals gently. Yes, Grant Whitaker had definitely made an impression. Throughout her Tuesday double shift, Eleanor found herself thinking about Grant more than she wanted to admit. Part of her wondered if this was all just a distraction for him, if by Wednesday he'd have come to his senses and forgotten all about the waitress who found him crying in a chapel. She almost expected him to cancel. But on Tuesday night, a text message came through from a number she didn't recognize. "Looking forward to tomorrow." "Is 2 p.m. okay? I can bring lunch." Grant. Elena saved his number and replied, "2 p.m. is perfect. Don't worry about lunch. I'll make sandwiches." Then she stared at her phone, wondering what she was getting herself into. Wednesday morning was busy, with her father's doctor appointment. The news wasn't good. The cancer was spreading faster than they'd hoped. The doctor suggested a new treatment that might help, but it wasn't covered by insurance and would cost thousands of dollars they didn't have. Elena fought back tears on the taxi ride home, putting on a brave face for her dad. By the time they got back to the apartment, he was exhausted. She helped him into bed and gave him his medication, which made him drift off to sleep almost immediately. She had just enough time to clean up the small living room and make sandwiches before the doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m. Grant stood in the hallway looking entirely different from the man in the tuxedo. He wore jeans and a simple blue sweater that matched his eyes. His hair was neatly combed, and he held a small paper bag in one hand. He looked nervous. "Hi," he said with a hesitant smile. "Hi," Elena replied, suddenly feeling self-conscious about the faded jeans and old t-shirt she was wearing. "Come in." Grant entered the small apartment, his eyes taking in the worn furniture, the dated kitchen, and the makeshift bedroom visible through the partially open door where her father slept. If he was surprised by the modest surroundings, he didn't show it. "I know you said not to bring lunch," he said, holding up the paper bag, "but I couldn't come empty-handed. It's just some cookies from that cafe we went to." "Thank you," Elena said, taking the bag. "And thank you for the flowers. They really brightened up the place." Grant looked pleased. You knew they were from me? Who else would they be from? Elena smiled. Let me put these in the kitchen. Have a seat. They settled on the small couch, eating the sandwiches Elena had made. Grant told her about how he'd been avoiding calls from his family and friends, not ready to talk about what had happened at the wedding. The gossip columns are having a field day, he said with a grimace. Apparently Vivian gave an exclusive interview claiming I was controlling and that she escaped the relationship. Elena raised her eyebrows. Is that true? No, Grant said, firmly. If anything, she was the controlling one, always worried about appearances, about what events we attended, about who saw us where. I just went along with it because, he paused, thinking, because it was easier than admitting we had nothing real. Elena nodded. Sometimes it's easier to stay in the wrong relationship than to face being alone. Grant looked at her curiously. You sound like you speak from experience. I was engaged once, Elena admitted. 6 years ago. He left when my dad first got sick. Said he didn't sign up to take care of an old man. I'm sorry, Grant said softly. Elena shrugged. Don't be. Like you said, he did me a favor. If he couldn't handle the tough times, he wasn't the right person anyway. They were interrupted by a sound from the bedroom. Ellie, her father called weakly. Excuse me, Elena said, getting up quickly. She went to check on her father, helping him sit up and bringing him a glass of water. Is your friend here? He asked, his voice frail but his eyes alert. Yes, Dad. His name is Grant. Bring him in. I want to meet the man who sends my daughter flowers. Elena hesitated. Dad, you're tired. I can introduce you another time. Nonsense, her father insisted. If he's good enough for my Ellie, he's someone I need to meet. Elena sighed and went back to the living room. My dad wants to meet you, she told Grant. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'd like to meet him, Grant said, standing up, if that's okay with you. Elena led him into the small bedroom. Her father looked small and frail in the bed, his once strong frame now thin and weak from illness, but his eyes were sharp as he assessed Grant. So you're the man who made my daughter smile yesterday, he said. Grant stepped forward and offered his hand. Grant Whitaker, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. Robert Porter, her father replied, shaking Grant's hand with what little strength he had. You look familiar. Have we met? I don't think so, sir, Grant replied. He probably looks familiar. Because his picture's been in the newspapers, Dad, Elena explained. Grant is... She paused, not sure how to describe who he was. I'm the guy who got left at the altar last weekend, Grant filled in with a self-deprecating smile. It made the society pages. Robert's eyes widened with recognition. The Whitaker wedding? That was you? Grant nodded. Well, their loss is Ellie's. Gain, I suppose? Robert said with a weak chuckle. Sit down, young man. Tell me about yourself. To Elena's surprise, Grant pulled up a chair and began chatting with her father as if they were old friends. He didn't talk about his wealth or his family's business. Instead, he asked Robert about his life, his career as a mechanic, his interests. Elena watched them, amazed at how comfortable Grant seemed in their humble home, sitting next to her father's sickbed. After a while, Robert began to tire, his eyelids drooping. We should let you rest, Dad, Elena said, adjusting his pillows. Come back soon, Grant, Robert said, his voice fading as sleep began to overtake him. Any friend of Ellie's is welcome here. Back in the living room, Elena turned to Grant. Thank you for that. He doesn't get many visitors. He's a good man, Grant said sincerely. You can see where you get your kindness from. Elena felt tears welling up suddenly. The stress of the doctor's appointment, the worry about money, and now Grant's unexpected warmth toward her father. It was all too much. I'm sorry, she said, wiping at her eyes. It's been a hard day. What happened? Grant asked, his face full of concern. Before she could stop herself, Eleanor told him about the doctor's appointment, about the cancer spreading, about the expensive treatment they couldn't afford. The doctor says it could give him another year, maybe more, she said, her voice breaking. But without it, they're talking months, and I just can't afford it, even with both jobs. Grant listened, his face serious. When she finished, he reached out and took her hand. Elena, I want to help. She pulled her hand away immediately. No, that's not why I told you. I don't want your money. I know that, Grant said gently. That's one of the things I like most about you. But please let me do this. Not because I'm trying to impress you or because I feel obligated, but because I want to help your father. He deserves that chance. We barely know each other, Elena protested. Sometimes you don't need years to know what kind of person someone is, Grant replied. You knew I needed help in that chapel. You didn't hesitate. Let me do the same for you now. Elena shook her head, torn between pride and desperation. I can't accept that kind of gift. Then don't think of it as a gift, Grant suggested. Think of it as a loan. You can pay me back someday, if that makes you feel better. Elena stared at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or condescension. She found none, only genuine concern. Why would you do this? She asked. Because sitting with you in that chapel was the first real thing I've felt in years, Grant answered honestly. And because helping your father would make me happier than anything I could buy for myself. Eleanor looked toward her father's room, listening to his labored breathing. Could she really say no to something that might give him more time? I need to think about it, she finally said. Grant nodded. Of course, take all the time you need. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about lighter things, favorite books, childhood memories, silly stories. When it was time for Grant to leave, he stood at the door, looking reluctant to go. Can I see you again this weekend? He asked. I'm working Saturday, but I'm free Sunday afternoon, Elena replied. Sunday it is, Grant said with a smile. Maybe we could take your father to the park if he's feeling up to it? Some fresh air might do him good. The thought of Grant spending his Sunday pushing her father's wheelchair around the park made Elena's heart tighten in her chest. He'd like that. After Grant left, Eleanor sat beside her sleeping father, watching his chest rise and fall. She thought about Grant's offer to pay for the treatment. Her pride told her to refuse, but her love for her father told her to accept. Could she really let him go sooner than necessary because she was too proud to accept help? Later that evening, her phone buzzed with a text from Grant. I meant what I said earlier, no strings, no expectations, just a chance to help someone who deserves it. Elena stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, okay. But it's a loan, I'll pay you back someday. Grant's response came immediately. Deal, I'll make the arrangements tomorrow. Get some rest, Elena. As she got ready for bed that night, Elena wondered if she was making a mistake. Getting involved with Grant Whitaker would complicate her already complicated life. And what would happen when he inevitably returned to his world of wealth and privilege? Where would that leave her and her father? But watching her father sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, Elena couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. Sometimes you had to take a chance, even when you were afraid of getting hurt. Across town, Grant sat in his penthouse smiling at his phone. For the first time since the wedding disaster, he didn't feel lost or humiliated. He felt purposeful. Connecting with Elena and her father had given him something he'd been missing in his life of privilege: meaning. He made a call to his personal assistant, instructing her to contact the best oncology specialists in the city. Money was no object. Robert Porter would get the best care available. Then he opened his laptop and began researching cancer treatments. If he was going to help Elena and her father through this, he wanted to understand what they were facing. He stayed up late into the night, reading medical articles and patient forums, learning everything he could about the disease that was threatening to take away the father of the woman who had offered him a tissue when he needed it most. By the time morning came, Grant had a plan, and for the first time in years he felt truly alive. True to his word, Grant arranged everything the very next day. By Friday afternoon, Robert Porter had an appointment with one of the top oncologists in the country. By Monday, he was starting the new treatment. Elena watched in amazement as doors that had been firmly closed suddenly swung open. The waiting lists that had seemed impossibly long disappeared. The treatment that had been too expensive was now covered by an anonymous donor, though Elena knew exactly who that donor was. Sunday came, and as promised, Grant arrived at their apartment ready to take Robert to the park. He'd brought a thick blanket to keep Robert warm and a thermos of homemade soup. My housekeeper's recipe, he explained as they tucked the blanket around Robert's legs in the wheelchair. She swears it cures everything from colds to broken hearts. The day was crisp, but sunny, perfect for an outing. As they strolled through the park, people occasionally did double takes when they spotted Grant. A few even took photos from a distance. Elena noticed but tried not to let it bother her. "Does it always happen?" she asked quietly, while her father was admiring some birds at the pond. "The staring, the photos?" Grant sighed. "Usually. The Whitaker name comes with a certain amount of public interest, and after the wedding fiasco, it's worse than usual. I didn't realize you were quite so famous," Elena admitted. "Does it bother you?" Grant asked, looking concerned. Elena thought about it. "Not for me, but I don't want my dad's illness to become gossip for strangers." "I understand," Grant said, nodding. "We can be more careful about where we go. Maybe stick to less public places." They found a quiet bench in the sun, and Grant helped move Robert from the wheelchair. The three of them sat together, talking and watching the people pass by. Robert seemed stronger today, his face gaining some color from the fresh air and sunshine. "So, Grant," Robert said, his voice stronger than it had been. "In weeks, Elena tells me you run your family's shipping business." "That's right," Grant replied, though shipping barely describes it anymore. "We have interests in technology, real estate, clean energy. My grandfather and father diversified extensively." "And you?" Robert asked. "What's your passion in all this empire building?" Grant looked thoughtful. "Honestly, I've been so busy doing what was expected of me that I never really stopped to figure that out." "Well, that's no way to live," Robert said bluntly. "A man needs to know what drives him, what makes life worth the trouble." Elena expected Grant to be offended by her father's frankness, but instead he nodded seriously. "You're right," he agreed. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. The wedding falling apart was a shock, but maybe it was also a wake-up call. Sometimes life has to knock you down before you can stand up properly," Robert said, with the wisdom of someone who had faced his share of hardships. Later, as they were heading back to the apartment, Robert grew tired. Grant insisted on pushing the wheelchair, while Eleanor walked beside them. An older couple passed by, smiling at what appeared to be a devoted family. "What a lovely family you are," the woman commented. None of them corrected her. Back at the apartment, Robert was exhausted but happy. Elena helped him into bed while Grant made tea in the kitchen, as if he'd been doing it for years. "He's a good man, Ellie," Robert said quietly as she adjusted his pillows. "Rich as sin, but still a good man." "I know, Dad," Elena replied, checking his medication schedule. "Don't let your pride get in the way of happiness," her father advised. "I've watched you push people away because you think you don't deserve good things. You do." "It's not that simple," Elena said. "We come from completely different worlds." "Worlds change," Robert said simply. "Hearts don't." In the living room, Grant was looking at the few family photos Elena had displayed on a small shelf. Picked up one showing a younger Robert in work clothes, his arm around a small Elena in a school uniform. "You look so happy," Grant commented when Elena joined him. "We were," she said, taking the photo. "Dad worked so hard to give me a good life after Mum left. He never complained, never made me feel like I was a burden. He's an extraordinary man," Grant said. "I can see where you get your strength." Elena put the photo back. "He's the strongest person I know. Even now, he worries more about me than himself." Grant turned to face her. "Elena, I want you to know something. What I'm doing for your father, it's not because I expect anything from you, I just want to help." "I know," Elena said softly. "That's what makes you different from most people I've known." Grant's phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. He checked the screen and frowned. "Everything okay?" Elena asked. "It's my brother," Grant sighed. "He wants me to come to a board meeting tomorrow. I've been avoiding the office since the wedding." "You should go," Elena encouraged. "You can't hide forever." "I know," Grant admitted. "I just dread the pitying looks, the whispers." "So give them something else to talk about," Elena suggested. "Show them you're moving forward, not dwelling on the past." Grant smiled at her. "You're right again." When it was time for Grant to leave, he lingered at the door. "Thank you for today," he said. "Being with you and your father, it feels real. Like I can just be myself." "You can," Elena assured him. We don't care about the Whitaker name or your bank account, just you. Grant leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he kissed her cheek softly. I'll call you tomorrow after the meeting, he promised. Elena watched him walk down the hallway, her cheek still warm from his kiss. Part of her wanted to call him back to find out what a real kiss would feel like, but another part, the cautious part, warned her to take things slowly. Grant was still healing from his broken engagement, and her life was complicated enough without adding romance to the mix. The next day, Grant walked into the Whitaker Industries headquarters for the first time since the wedding disaster. As expected, the receptionist did a double take, and whispers followed him to the elevator. He straightened his tie, remembered Elena's advice, and plastered a confident smile on his face. The boardroom fell silent when he entered. His brother James looked up in surprise. "Grant," he said, recovering quickly. "Glad you could join us." "Wouldn't." "Miss it," Grant replied, taking his usual seat at the table. "Shall we get started?" The meeting proceeded, focusing on a potential acquisition of a smaller shipping company. Grant listened, asked questions, and made suggestions with a clarity and focus that seemed to surprise everyone present. The humiliation of being left at the altar had somehow freed him from caring too much about others' opinions, and it showed in his decisiveness. After the meeting, James cornered him in his office. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "You haven't. Returned calls. You've missed meetings." "I needed some time," Grant replied calmly. "Time for what? To wallow?" James scoffed. "The tabloids are having a field day with you and Vivian. There are rumors you're drinking yourself into oblivion." Grant laughed. "Well, they're wrong. I've never been clearer-headed." "Really?" James looked skeptical. "Because there are also rumors you've been seen with some unknown woman. Please tell me you're not rebounding with the first girl who showed interest." Grant felt a flash of anger. "Her name is Elena, and she's none of your business." "Everything about the Whitaker name is my business," James insisted. "We have a reputation to maintain. An image." "I don't care about the image," Grant interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Not anymore." James stared at him. "What's gotten into you?" "Perspective," Grant answered. "I've spent my whole life trying to live up to the Whitaker name. And what did it get me? A fiancé who didn't love me, a social circle that's more interested in gossip than genuine connection, and a family that cares more about appearances than happiness." "That's not fair," James protested. "Maybe not," Grant conceded. "But it's how I feel, and for the first time in my life I'm going to pay attention to those feelings instead of ignoring them." Without waiting for a response, Grant gathered his things and left, feeling lighter than he had in years. He pulled out his phone and texted Elena. "Meeting over. Can I see you tonight?" Her response came quickly. "Dad's having a good day. Come." "For dinner? Nothing fancy, just spaghetti." "Sounds perfect," Grant replied. "Need me to bring anything?" "Just yourself." Grant smiled, tucking his phone away. He walked through the lobby, ignoring the stares and whispers, his mind already on the evening ahead. When he arrived at Elena's apartment that evening, he was surprised to find Robert in the kitchen, sitting at the table and helping to make a salad. "Look at you," Grant said, genuinely pleased. "So you're up and about. First day of the new treatment," Robert explained with a weak smile. "Feeling a bit more alive today." Elena was stirring sauce on the stove, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired, but happy. "The doctor says it's a good sign that he's responding so quickly," she told Grant, accepting the bottle of wine he'd brought despite her instructions not to bring anything. "So of course it is," Grant said, taking off his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves. "Now what can I do to help with dinner?" For the next hour, the small kitchen was filled with the sounds of chopping, stirring, and conversation. Grant set the table while Eleanor finished the sauce. Robert told stories about Elena's childhood, making her blush and Grant laugh. It was so normal, so domestic, that Grant almost forgot who he was supposed to be. Here, he wasn't Grant Whitaker, heir to a fortune and recent tabloid fixture. He was just Grant, a man helping make dinner for people he cared about. After dinner, while Eleanor washed dishes, Robert motioned Grant closer to his chair. "I need to ask you something," he said in a low voice. "And I need you to be honest. Of course, Grant replied, leaning in. What are your intentions with my daughter? The directness of the question took Grant by surprise. I care about her, he answered honestly. Very much. Good, Robert nodded. Because she cares about you too. I can see it. But Elena has been hurt before. She's built walls to protect herself. I would never hurt her, Grant promised. Not intentionally, perhaps, Robert acknowledged. But you have the power to hurt her badly. Your worlds are very different. That doesn't matter to me, Grant insisted. It might not matter now, Robert said wisely. But what about when the novelty wears off? When her 2 jobs and small apartment and sick father become inconvenient to your lifestyle? Grant considered the question seriously. Mr. Porter, I've lived with wealth and privilege my entire life. I've had everything money can buy. But sitting in that chapel, feeling completely alone despite having hundreds of wedding guests waiting for me, that taught me something important. None of it matters without genuine connection. Robert studied him, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. But be patient with her. Elena doesn't trust easily, especially when it comes to her heart. I'll wait as long as it takes, Grant assured him. Elena returned from the kitchen, looking between them suspiciously. What are you two whispering about? Man talk, Robert said with a wink at Grant. Nothing for you to worry about. Elena rolled her eyes but smiled. Dad, it's time for your medication and you need to rest. I know when I'm being dismissed, Robert chuckled, allowing Eleanor to help him to his feet. Good night, Grant. Thanks for the company. Good night, Mr. Porter, Grant replied. I'll see you soon. Once Robert was settled in bed, Elena joined Grant on the small couch in the living room. They sat close together, their shoulders touching. Lightly. He likes you, Elena said. He doesn't like many people these days. I like him too, Grant replied. You're lucky to have each other. Eleanor nodded, sudden tears filling her eyes. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for him. This treatment, it's already making a difference. You don't need to. Thank me, Grant said softly. Seeing him better, seeing you happier, that's all the thanks I need. Elena turned to face him. Why are you doing all this, Grant? Really? Grant thought carefully before answering. When you found me in that chapel, I was at my lowest point. Not just because of the wedding, but because I realized my entire life felt empty. Meaningful connections, the kind you have with your father, those were missing from my world. He took her hand gently. Being with you, with your father, helping, in whatever way I can, it makes me feel like I'm finally living a real life. Not the one that was planned for me or expected of me, but one that matters. Eleanor's eyes searched his face. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. Slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a soft, hesitant kiss. Grant responded gently, letting her set the pace, afraid of scaring her away. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. I've been wanting to do that, she admitted, with a small smile. So have I, Grant confessed, since the day in the cafe. They sat together for hours, talking softly about everything and nothing. Grant told her about the board meeting, about standing up to his brother. Elena told him about her dreams of going back to school someday, of becoming a nurse after seeing the care her father had received. It was nearly midnight when Grant reluctantly stood to leave. I should go. You need to rest, and I have another meeting in the morning. At the door, he kissed her again, longer this time, his arms wrapping around her waist as hers circled his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster. Good night, Elena, he whispered. Good night, Grant. As he walked to his car, Grant felt a lightness in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. The disaster of his wedding day no longer seemed like a tragedy. Instead, it felt like the first step on a path that had led him exactly where he needed to be. He didn't notice the photographer hiding across the street, capturing his exit from Elena's building. He didn't see the flash or hear the click of the camera. He was too caught up in thoughts of Elena's kiss, of Robert's improving health, of the real life he was finally beginning to build. The next morning, Grant was awakened by his phone ringing insistently. It was James, his voice tight with anger. Have you seen the morning papers? He demanded without preamble. No, Grant mumbled, still half asleep. Why? Because you're on the front page of the tabloids, coming out of some apartment building at midnight. Whitaker airs secret romance is the headline. Grant sat up, suddenly wide awake. What? There's more, James continued grimly. They've identified her. Elena Porter, waitress and bartender, daughter of Robert Porter, mechanic. They've dug up everything, Grant, and they're painting it as your pathetic rebound from Vivian. Grant's heart sank. Eleanor's privacy, the peaceful bubble they had created, it was all about to be shattered. And it was his fault. I have to go, he said, hanging up on James's continued lecturing. He quickly dialed Elena's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. Throwing on clothes, he rushed to his car, hoping he could reach her before the reporters did. But as he pulled up to her apartment building, he saw he was already too late. A small crowd of photographers and reporters were gathered outside, cameras, ready. And somewhere inside, Elena and her father were about to discover just how drastically their lives had changed. Elena was just making coffee when her phone started ringing non-stop. First it was her co-worker from the diner, then her neighbor, then people she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored the calls, confused by the sudden attention. Then came the knock on her door, loud, insistent. She looked through the peephole to see a woman she didn't recognize holding a recorder. Miss Porter, Elena Porter, can we get a comment about your relationship with Grant Whitaker? The woman called through the door. Elena stepped back, her heart pounding. More knocks followed. More voices calling her name from the hallway. She turned on the TV to see what was happening and froze when she saw her own picture on the morning news. It was a grainy shot of her and Grant standing in the doorway of her apartment, kissing. The Whitaker rebound, read the headline crawling across the bottom of the screen. Billionaire's new romance just days after wedding disaster. Ellie, what's going on? Robert called from his bedroom, awakened by the commotion. Nothing, Dad, she replied automatically, turning off the TV. Just some mix-up with the neighbors. She checked her phone and saw missed calls from Grant. Before she could call him back, a text came through. Elena, I'm so sorry, there are reporters outside your building. Don't go out, I'm on my way. Elena peeked through the curtains and saw the crowd gathering on the street below. Cameras, microphones, people shouting up at her windows. Her quiet life had suddenly become public property. Her phone rang again, Grant calling. She answered. Elena, thank God, he said, sounding breathless. I'm in my car around the corner. The front of your building is blocked with reporters. What's happening, Grant? She asked, her voice shaking. Someone took pictures of me leaving your apartment last night, he explained. It's all over the tabloids. They've figured out who you are. Eleanor sank onto the couch, shock washing over her. My father, he can't deal with this. He needs peace and quiet. I know, Grant said, his voice tight with concern. Is there a back entrance to your building? A service elevator? Yes, through the basement garage. Good. Pack a bag for you and your father. Essential items only. I'm going to get you both out of there. And go where? Elena asked. Somewhere safe, Grant promised. Trust me, Elena, please. After hanging up, Elena quickly explained the situation to her father, trying to downplay the chaos. Robert, however, was sharper than she gave him credit for. This is what happens when you date famous people, he remarked with surprising calm. But don't worry about me, Ellie. I've dealt with worse than nosy reporters. Elena packed their medications, some clothes, and essential toiletries into 2 small bags. Her hands were shaking. Just days ago, her biggest worry had been making rent and keeping up with her father's medical appointments. Now she was essentially fleeing her own home. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grant. I'm in the basement garage, north corner. Come. On, Dad, Eleanor said, helping Robert into his wheelchair. Grant's here to pick us up. They took the service elevator down to the basement. Grant was waiting by his car, his face tight with worry. When he saw them, relief washed over his features. Thank you for trusting me, he said, helping Robert into the passenger seat. He stored the wheelchair in the trunk while Eleanor climbed. Into the back. Where are we going? She asked as Grant started the car. My family has a lake house about 2 hours from the city, he explained as they drove up the ramp. It's private, gated. No one will bother us there. As they left the city behind, Eleanor stared out the window, her thoughts racing. In just a few days, her whole life had been turned upside down. She'd gone from anonymous waitress to tabloid headline. And for what? Because she'd fallen for a man who happened to be wealthy and well-known? "I'm sorry," Grant said, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. "This is all my fault." "It's not your fault," Elena replied automatically. "It is," Grant insisted. "I should have been more careful. I should have known they'd be watching me after the wedding." "You couldn't have known," Robert interjected from the passenger seat. "And hiding is no way to live." Grant glanced at the older man with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Porter, but I still feel responsible for disrupting your lives." They drove in silence for a while, the landscape changing from urban to suburban to rural. Finally, Grant turned onto a private road that wound through thick woods. At the end of the road stood a lake house that was more like a mansion, a sprawling structure of wood and glass overlooking a pristine lake. "This is your idea of a lake house?" Eleanor asked, unable to hide her amazement. Grant looked embarrassed. "At you. It's a bit much, I know, but it's private and comfortable." He helped Robert into his wheelchair and guided them inside. The interior was spacious but cozy, with large windows showcasing the lake view. A housekeeper greeted them. Grant had called ahead and showed them to their rooms. Elena helped her father get settled in a ground-floor bedroom with an attached bathroom that had been modified for accessibility. She was touched by Grant's thoughtfulness. He had clearly made arrangements to ensure Robert would be comfortable. "This place is something else," Robert commented as Elena unpacked their medications. "Your young man lives in a different world." "Helly?" "He's not my young man, Dad," Elena protested weakly. "Then what is he?" Robert asked gently. Elena didn't have an answer. Later, she found Grant in the kitchen, talking on his phone. He hung up when he saw her. "Everything okay?" she asked. "That was my assistant," he explained. "The media frenzy is getting worse. Vivian's given another interview, claiming I moved on suspiciously quickly, implying there was something between us before the wedding fell apart." Eleanor felt sick. "That's not true." "Of course it's not," Grant agreed, "but the truth rarely matters in these situations." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I've also heard from my brother. The board is concerned about the company's image. They want me to make a statement, distance myself from the scandal." "Distance yourself from me, you mean?" Elena said quietly. Grant looked at her sharply. "That's not going to happen." "Maybe it should," Elena suggested, voicing the doubts that had been growing since they fled her apartment. "This is your life, Grant. Cameras, headlines, board meetings, it's not mine. I just want to take care of my father and live in peace." "Elena," Grant started, but was interrupted by his phone ringing again. He checked the screen and sighed. "I need to take this. It's my lawyer." But this conversation isn't over. While Grant took his call, Eleanor wandered onto the deck overlooking the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the clouds above. How had her simple life become so complicated in just a few days? She thought about the moment in the chapel, when she'd seen Grant hunched over in the front pew. If she had simply walked past him, if she hadn't offered that tissue, none of this would be happening. Her father would still be struggling with inadequate treatment, and she would still be working double shifts to make ends meet, but at least their lives would be their own. Yet, despite the chaos, she couldn't bring herself to regret meeting Grant. There was something real between them, something she hadn't felt in years, if ever. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Grant's voice came from behind her. Elena turned to see him standing in the doorway, his phone finally put away. "Just thinking about how quickly life can change," she replied. Grant came to stand beside her at the railing. "I've been thinking the same thing. A week ago, I was about to marry the wrong woman for all the wrong reasons. Now I'm here, with you. And a media circus following your every move," Elena added. "They'll lose interest eventually," Grant said. "Some new scandal will come along and we'll be yesterday's news." "And then what?" Elena asked, turning to face him. "What happens when the dust settles, Grant? You go back to running your family's empire, and I go back to waiting tables and caring for my dad." Grant took her hands in his. "Is that what you think? That this is temporary for me?" "I don't know what to think," Elena admitted. "Our worlds are so different." "They don't have to be," Grant said softly. "Elena, I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who only cared about what I could do for them. My money, my name, my connections. Then you came along and offered me a tissue when I was at my lowest point, expecting nothing in return. You saw me as a person, not as a Whittaker. He squeezed her hands gently. I know this is happening fast. I know it's complicated, but I'm falling in love with you, Elena Porter. And I don't care what the tabloids say or what my family thinks. I just want to be with you. Eleanor felt tears pricking her eyes. I'm falling for you too, she whispered, and that scares me more than any reporter or headline. Grant pulled her, close, wrapping his arms around her. We'll figure this out together, he promised. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. They stayed on the deck until sunset, talking about their fears, their hopes, their dreams. Grant told her about his desire to redirect some of the Whittaker fortune toward medical research and treatment for those who couldn't afford care. Elena shared her dream of finishing her nursing degree, inspired by the care her father had received. By the time they went inside, something had shifted between them. The chaos of the outside world still existed, but it seemed less important now. The next morning, while Eleanor was helping her father with breakfast, Grant entered the kitchen with a determined look. I've made a decision, he announced. I'm calling a press conference. What? Eleanor nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Why? Because we can't hide forever, Grant explained. The longer we let others control the narrative, the worse it gets. It's time I took control of the situation. What are you going to say? Eleanor asked nervously. The truth, Grant said simply, that I met an extraordinary woman who showed me kindness when I needed it most. That what happened with Vivian was for the best, that I'm rebuilding my life on my terms, not anyone else's. Will that stop the gossip? Robert asked skeptically. Probably not entirely, Grant admitted, but it's better than hiding, and I want to do this right. He turned to Elena. I want to be honest about us, about what we mean to each other, but only if you're comfortable with it. Elena hesitated. Going public would mean even more scrutiny, more invasion of their privacy. But hiding away in this beautiful house wasn't a long-term solution either. Okay, she agreed finally, but I don't want to be there, and I don't want them to know where we are. Of course, Grant agreed. I'll handle everything. The press conference was held the next day at the Whittaker Industries headquarters. Eleanor watched it on television from the lake house, her father beside her. Grant looked confident and composed as he addressed the crowd of reporters. I know there's been a lot of speculation about my personal life, he began, so let me set the record straight. Yes, my engagement to Vivian Reed ended on our wedding day, and yes, I have begun a relationship with someone new. The reporters erupted with questions, but Grant held up his hand. Elena Porter came into my life when I was at my lowest point. She showed me kindness without knowing or caring who I was. What has developed between us is genuine and private. I would appreciate if the media would respect that privacy, particularly where her father's health is concerned. Grant continued, his voice steady. I understand there's public interest in my life. I accept that as part of being a Whittaker. But Elena and her father did not choose this spotlight, and they deserve to be left in peace. He then shocked everyone by announcing a new Whittaker Foundation initiative to fund cancer treatments for patients who couldn't afford them, inspired by Robert's situation. The reporters immediately shifted focus, asking about the foundation rather than his love life. When the press conference ended, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Grant. How did I do? He asked. You were amazing, she told him, tears in her eyes. The foundation, Grant. I don't know what to say. It's something I should have done years ago, he replied. Your father helped me see what really matters. Robert, who had been watching closely, took the phone from Elena. Good job, son, he said, standing up for what matters. Thank you. Sir, Grant replied, his voice thick with emotion at being called son. In the days that followed, the media frenzy gradually died down. Grant's straightforward approach and the announcement of the foundation had changed the narrative. Instead of a scandalous rebound, the story became one of transformation and purpose. After a week at the lake house, it was time for Robert's next treatment. Grant arranged for a private doctor to visit rather than risking a trip to the hospital where reporters might be waiting. The treatment went well, and Robert continued to show signs of improvement. One evening, as the three of them sat on the deck watching the sunset, Robert made an announcement. "I've been thinking," he said, "about when we go back to the apartment." Elena. Tensed, she'd been avoiding thinking about their return to normal life. "I don't think we should," Robert continued calmly. "What do you mean, Dad?" Eleanor asked. "That place was never meant to be permanent," Robert explained. "It was all we could afford, but it's not the right environment for my recovery. The stairs, the small rooms, the noisy neighbors. I think it's time for a change." But Elena began to protest. "I've found a place," Robert interrupted. "A small house near the hospital, one level, with a garden. I called about it yesterday." Elena stared at her father in shock. "How? We can't afford—" "I can," Robert said firmly. "I've been saving for years, Ellie. And with the new treatment working so well, I want to enjoy whatever time I have left in a place that feels like home." Elena looked to Grant, suspecting his involvement, but he seemed as surprised as she was. "Dad, are you sure?" she asked. "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time," Robert replied with a smile. "It's time we both stopped putting our lives on hold because of my illness. You've sacrificed enough, Ellie." Later that night, when Robert had gone to bed, Elena and Grant walked along the lakeshore under a sky full of stars. "Did you know about the house?" she asked. "No," Grant answered honestly. "Your father asked me for some advice about neighborhoods, but he was very clear that he wanted to do this himself. He's a proud man." "Like his daughter," Elena said with a small smile. "Exactly like his daughter," Grant agreed, taking her hand. "Elena, these past weeks have been the most real, most meaningful of my life, even with all the chaos." "For me too," she admitted. Grant stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know it's fast, I know we come from different worlds, but I also know that I love you." The words hung in the night air between them. Eleanor's heart pounded. "I love you too," she whispered. "Despite all my efforts not to." Grant smiled and pulled her close. "Then let's build a new world together. Not yours, not mine, ours." "It won't be easy," Eleanor warned. "The gossip, your family's disapproval, my work and studies." "Nothing worth having ever is," Grant replied. "But we'll figure it out day by day, together." As they sealed their promise with a kiss beneath the stars, Elena thought about the tissue she had offered in that quiet chapel. Such a small gesture that had changed both their lives in ways she could never have imagined. 2 months later, Robert moved into his new house, a charming single-story home with a beautiful garden, just as he'd wanted. Elena helped him settle in, arranging his favorite chair by the window where he could watch the birds. "It's perfect." "Dad," she said, sitting on the arm of his chair. "It is," he agreed, looking better than he had in months. The new treatment was working, giving him strength and energy they had feared was gone forever. "Now, when do you start classes?" Elena smiled. She had enrolled in nursing school, finally pursuing the dream she'd put on hold when her father got sick. Grant had insisted on paying her tuition, calling it an investment in their future. After much debate, she had accepted. "Next week," she replied. "I'm nervous." "You'll be wonderful," Robert assured her. "You've been taking care of people your whole life. Now you'll just have the certificate to prove it." The doorbell rang, and Elena went to answer it. Grant stood on the porch, holding not flowers this time, but a small wrapped package. "How's the moving going?" he asked, stepping inside. "Almost done," Elena replied, accepting his quick kiss. "Dad's enjoying his new kingdom." They joined Robert in the living room, and Grant handed him the package. "A housewarming gift," he explained. Robert unwrapped it to find a beautiful wooden box. Inside was a handkerchief monogrammed with his initials. "Every gentleman needs a good handkerchief," Grant said with a smile. "You never know when someone might need it." Robert's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he understood the significance. "Thank you, son," he said, reaching out to squeeze Grant's hand. Elena watched the two men who meant everything to her, her heart full. Life had taken an unexpected turn the day she walked into that chapel, but she wouldn't change a moment of it. Later, as they prepared dinner together in Robert's new kitchen, Grant pulled Eleanor aside. "I have something for you too," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small folded note. Elena opened it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside, he had written, "For the woman who offered a tissue and changed my life. The chapel where we met is holding a small private service next month. I'd like to meet you there again. This time to make a promise of forever, just us, no crowds, no press, will you?" Elena looked up, her eyes wide. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes," Grant answered simply, "not because it's expected or because it makes good business sense, but because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you." Eleanor thought about all they had been through in such a short time, the media frenzy, the family disapproval, the adjustments to each other's worlds. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been worth it. "Yes," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "I'll meet you at the chapel." In the other room, Robert smiled to himself as he heard his daughter's joyful response. He carefully folded his new handkerchief and placed it in his shirt pocket right over his heart. Sometimes, he thought, the smallest gestures of kindness, like offering a tissue to a stranger in need, could change lives in ways no one could predict. And sometimes, those changes were exactly what everyone needed. The end